Some scary shit happened to me a few weeks ago. My wife was out of town, and none of my friends were available to hang out, so I decided I was going to binge watch something on Netflix. I queued up my show and headed into the kitchen to prepare some snacks. As I mentioned, my wife was gone, so my intention was to absolutely gorge myself on unhealthy food. What can I say? Guys do that. I really had a craving for homemade caramel popcorn, with bits of toffee in it. I had everything I needed on the counter and was heating up the stove when the inevitable happened. My power went out. Great, I thought. I don't even need to mention how, in this day and age, no power for extended periods can be unbearably boring, even with a phone. No power means no modem, which ultimately means no Wi-Fi. I felt my way into the living room, looking for my phone to check its battery life. The house was unusually dark. I finally found it by rummaging around my coffee table, my eyes beginning to adjust to my somber surroundings. My phone was at 57%. That'll have to do, I thought to myself. By the soft glow of my phone's screen, I navigated my way to the living room window. As I peered out, I noticed the whole neighborhood was draped in the same shadowy blanket. The absence of lampancy from street lamps and porch lights really gave my old familiar cul-de-sac a sense of recondite silence. It was a little creepy, to be honest. As I backed away from the window, I felt the soft hum of the emergency generator come to life. The generator isn't much, and only powers our home security system, consisting of an alarm and a motion sensor floodlight located in the backyard. The system belongs to our landlord, and was already installed before we moved in. We've never really had a need for it, but knowing it's there is comforting, I guess. I'd been laying on the couch, killing time, and my phone's battery playing a game, when all of a sudden, red and blue light began pouring into the living room. I heard commotion and loud radios from outside. I bolted from the couch to the window to investigate. My first thought was that old Mrs. Hobson, from 2 houses down, finally bought the farm. I know that sounds morbid, but she's older than God, and barely on this side of lucid. If you lived here, you'd understand. Under inspection, there were about 5 or 6 police cars parked on my street. All the police were in a huddle discussing something, pointing towards various houses. All I could make out was one of them say, "Set up a perimeter." I moved from the window and opened the front door, stepping out onto my deck. The police were moving fast and frantically, shouting things to one another. One cop was passing my yard, so I called to him, "Hey, excuse me, what's going on?" I asked, as I watched other officers begin to set up a barricade at the cul-de-sac entrance. I must have startled him. He stopped, dead in his tracks, his hand hovering over his holstered weapon. He shot his head in my direction. "You live here?" he asked, his voice enforcing his authority. Yeah, man," I said, raising my hand, stepping back. "Get inside, lock the door," he shouted. "An officer will talk to you shortly." I quickly stepped in and locked the door as he suggested. I returned to the window, however. I had to get some kind of information as to what the fuck was happening. Was this a prison escape? Or some kind of manhunt? Besides, with no television, I figured this could at the very least provide some evening entertainment. As I watched, a few of my neighbors made their way outside to satisfy their own curiosity. But they were met with the same cautious instructions. This was getting strange. There were at least 12 officers patrolling the area with flashlights and dogs. Suddenly, there was a reflection in my window. I turned around, and through the back window I noticed the backyard floodlight had been triggered. I figured it must have been the police. I hurried to the back and peeked through the glass. The bright LED light revealed nothing out of the ordinary, but just out of the light's reach, I could make out that my back gate had been opened. My concern grew stronger. My wife and I never used the back gate, so there's no way one of us forgot to close it. I assumed it was one of the cops, but not knowing why they were here made it easy to jump to conclusions. I focused on the poorly lit area, squinting in an effort to improve my vision. It looked like someone or something was standing in the opening of the gate. There was subtle movement, but no sound. The longer I stared, the more I became convinced something was definitely there. When the doorbell rang. The sudden sound made me jump. "Jesus Christ," I said, grabbing my chest. Another quick glance out the window showed whatever was there was gone now. I made my way to the front door, cursing whoever it was that just scared the bejesus out of me. While opening the door, the flashing red and blue still bled through the living room window, dancing with the shadows of the adjacent blackout. It was an officer. "Hello, sir, I'm Constable Patey," she said. "Sorry about the disturbance this evening, but we're currently handling the situation." "Nothing serious, I hope?" "I can't disclose anything yet, sir. Have you seen anything suspicious or out of the ordinary?" She was all business. "Well, actually, yes," I replied. I explained the back gate to the young, attractive officer. She couldn't have been older than 30, bright green eyes, maybe 5'8", with shiny black hair, pulled into a tight bun underneath her peaked cap. She insisted that there were no officers back there yet, but would be sure to check it out. After a few more routine questions, she ordered me to stay inside and promised she would let me know when they found something, or had more to tell me. I shut the door and headed to the back window to watch the police as they searched. The floodlight had shut itself off by this time, so the backyard was shrouded in darkness, with only attenuated starlight illuminating the already barely visible. 2 officers entered the backyard from the left side of the house, Constable Patey, and the first officer that initially told me to stay in my home. The floodlight lit up upon their entrance. As they approached the gate, Patey motioned to the perimeter that she could see something, and yelled, "Halt! Don't move!" Both officers drew their pistols and crept toward the opening with caution. My eyes were glued to the situation as my heart began thumping in my chest. I knew I saw something. Constable Patey kicked the gate open wide. I jumped at the sound of it swinging into the fence. At this point, they were falling out of light's reach. It was getting hard to make them out, but I could tell that they'd stopped just past the opening of the gate. "Why are you just standing there?" I wondered to myself. I watched intently as the 2 law enforcement slowly made their way out of view, swallowed by the darkness that enveloped the alley. They'd gone quiet. I expected more shouting, or something confirming they were making an arrest. The minutes continued to add. I was starting to think that maybe they had to chase whoever it was, or maybe it was nothing, and that they were continuing their sweep, when from over the fence I saw 2 bright, quick flashes of light. Gunshots, maybe? I thought. But I didn't hear anything. I continued watching for a few more minutes, then decided to make my way to the living room again, thinking maybe I could get some information from the action on the street. As I looked through the front window, I noticed there were fewer cars than before. Was it over? 2 officers were standing on the sidewalk in front of my house, so I stepped back out onto my deck. "Hey guys," I said, "any updates or anything at all you can tell me?" "We're just waiting for a few of our officers, sir," said the taller of the 2. "Did you happen to see them?" he asked. "You mean Constable Patey?" I asked. "Yes, and Officer Allen?" he inquired. I assumed Officer Allen was the one who was with her. I began to explain to the pair what I'd seen from my back window. They seemed worried when I mentioned the flashes. Suddenly, they both turned their gaze to the side of my house. It was Patey and Officer Allen. "Why weren't you 2 answering your radios?" asked one of the officers with a sense of relief. Constable Patey didn't answer. She and Officer Allen just walked to one of the police cars and got in. The other two officers looked at each other confused and shrugged. Everything is under control now, sir. Your power should be restored soon. Have a good evening," he said, hurried, while joining his partner towards Patey's car. Suddenly, Constable Patey's car sped off, the tires screeching against the pavement. The other two officers yelled into their radios, jumped into the remaining vehicles, and started after them. "What the fuck?" I said aloud. Not a single answer. No idea what just happened. And we're supposed to all be cool with this? What if there was just a murder in our neighborhood? Don't we citizens have the right to know what's going on in our own backyard? What a weird fucking night, I thought to myself, as I walked back inside. A few hours passed and the power finally returned. It was about 2 a.m., and I figured I was going to go to bed. So much for my popcorn and Netflix. I started shutting off all the lights and went to close the curtains when I saw someone standing in the street. It was Constable Patey. To make sure it was her, I stepped out onto my deck for a better look. She noticed me coming out and ran towards me. "Hey, what's going on?" she demanded. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Where is everyone?" "You mean the other officers?" I asked, squinting confusingly. She just kind of looked at me funny and continued to look around the neighborhood. "What did you see in my back alley?" I asked. She returned my confused stare, but didn't answer me. "Are you all right?" I asked. I explained that she and Officer Allen had returned and took off abruptly in her car, and how her fellow officers chased after her. "Allen, so he's okay?" she asked. "You sure it was him?" "You were there too," I replied. "You guys were together, don't you remember?" She was being very strange and vague with me, and to be honest, had a strange chemical smell about her. I couldn't quite identify it though. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her once bright green eyes now milky and bloodshot, with heavy bags below them. Her hair was still in a bun, but a little looser now. "Can I borrow your phone for a minute?" she asked. "My radio is broken, or something." I obliged and invited her inside. I stepped into the kitchen to give her some privacy while she made a call. She was brief, and thanked me for my hospitality. Yet she still hadn't told me what she saw in my backyard, or what happened to her. I tried to ask once more, but she insisted she had to go. I told her she could wait inside until her ride arrived, but she said she needed some air and headed outside, thanking me one last time. As I went to lock the door behind her, there was this intense bass-like sound. It shook the whole house, rattling the windows and pictures on my wall. The light started flickering, while the sound's vibrations actually buckled my knees, dropping me to the floor. All of a sudden, a blinding white light beamed through the windows, growing stronger with the accompanied noise. Then, as abruptly as it started, it was over. I struggled to my feet and flung the door open. With the exception of a few distant car alarms, the cul-de-sac was eerily quiet, along with no trace of Constable Patey. I ran out to the street and looked around but saw nothing. Just the dead autumn leaves seesawing playfully to the ground in the cool night breeze. As my neighbors made their way out of their homes to investigate the disturbance, all I could think was, what the fuck just happened? The next morning I was awoken by a detective, and a few men in black suits. I'm surprised I slept at all. The last thing I remember was sitting on my couch, scared out of my wits, replaying the trauma over and over in my mind. I filled them in on the events of the evening, and expressed that I was never given any explanation as to what was going on. They gave me the whole "as classified" thing, and asked me not to discuss anything with the media. There were no threats made, but I definitely felt intimidated. The man thanked me for my cooperation, then got into a black SUV and drove away. A few days later, I made a call to the local precinct. I asked for Constable Patey, and was told that nobody there knew anybody by that name, or an Officer Allen. It gets weirder. I called the number that she dialed from my phone the night she disappeared, but that number was no longer in service. Additionally, when I investigated the alley behind my house, I could smell that same strange chemical odor Patey was giving off for days. I don't know what happened that night, or what happened to Constable Patey or Officer Allen, but I really needed to tell this story. What do you think?